The crystal glasses clinked as Margaret Davidson, my mother-in-law, raised her fourth glass of champagne. A toast, she announced to the gathered family, her voice carrying its usual superior tone, to the Davidson family fortune built by generations of hard work. Her eyes locked onto me. Not that some people would understand that. I took a small sip of water, staying calm, just as I had for the past 3 years of marriage to her son Thomas. These monthly family dinners at the Davidson mansion had become a test of patience, with Margaret always finding a new way to insult my background, sometimes subtly, sometimes not. "Mother," Thomas started, but she waved him off. "Oh, darling, I'm just stating facts. When you married her," she said, motioning toward me with her glass, "everyone wondered why a Davidson heir would choose a girl from nowhere." What the Davidsons didn't know, what no one knew except my private banking team, was that I, Elena Chin, was actually the majority owner of Davidson Industries. Through carefully placed investments and hidden companies, I controlled the very fortune Margaret loved to brag about. Susan, Margaret's sister-in-law, smirked. "Tell us again, Margaret, about how your grandfather built the company from nothing." I held back a smile. The truth, which sat in a thick file in my office safe, was much different. Margaret's grandfather had started the company, but he lost control of it long ago due to bad decisions and risky loans. In the 1990s, my father, a quiet but brilliant investor, took over most of the shares without anyone realizing. When he passed away 5 years ago, he left everything to me, his fortune, his business skills, and a letter explaining that I was now the true owner of Davidson Industries. "Keep it quiet until the right moment," he had advised. "Elena," Margaret's sharp voice pulled me back to the present. "I noticed you're not drinking champagne. Not good enough for your refined taste." I smiled slightly. "Just being careful with expenses," I said, knowing it would annoy her. She took the bait. "Expenses? This is Dom Perignon, darling. 1 bottle costs more than you probably made in a month at that little investment firm where Thomas found you." If only she knew. That little firm was just one of many businesses owned by my family. I had worked there under a different name, learning the industry from the ground up. That's where I met Thomas, not the spoiled heir his mother imagined, but a hard-working man who refused to rely on his family's wealth. Margaret swirled her champagne and continued, "Speaking of expenses, Thomas tells me you're still working. Honestly, it's embarrassing. Davidson wives don't work. We have an image to maintain." "I enjoy keeping busy," I replied, glancing at Thomas. He knew I worked because I loved it, though even he didn't know the full extent of my business empire. "Busy," Margaret scoffed. "Is that what you call it? We all know why you're working, saving up money in case." The room went silent after Margaret's cruel words. Even for her, this was too much. "Mother, that's enough." Thomas stood up, his face red with anger. But Margaret wasn't finished. The champagne had made her bolder than usual. She waved him off and sneered at me. "Oh, sit down, Thomas. We all know the truth. This little nobody came from nowhere, latched onto you, and now she's just waiting to take the Davidson fortune." I thought about the financial reports sitting on my desk, the ones that proved the so-called Davidson fortune was falling apart. Margaret's reckless spending and bad decisions were draining the company dry. What she loved to brag about was nothing but an illusion kept alive by loans and tricky accounting. "Actually, Margaret," I said calmly, "I've been meaning to discuss the company's finances with you." She laughed loudly. "You? Discuss finances with me? I'm on the board of Davidson Industries. What could you possibly know?" It was time. I reached into my purse, pulled out a slim folder, and placed it on the table. "For starters, I could tell you about the secret loans you've taken using company assets. Or maybe you'd like to discuss the offshore accounts where you've been hiding company money." Margaret's champagne glass froze halfway to her lips. "What are you talking about?" "The Cayman Islands accounts, Margaret. The ones you thought no one knew about. Or should we talk about the fake company you created to buy vacation homes with company funds?" Her hand trembled as she slammed the glass onto the table, spilling champagne. "Thomas, are you going to let her speak to me like this?" Thomas looked between us, confused. "Elena, what's going on?" I slid the documents across the table. "These are the real financial statements for Davidson Industries, not the fake ones you've been showing the board. Care to explain why there's a $50 million gap?" Margaret's face turned pale. "Where did you get these?" "These are private board documents." I met her eyes. They're mine, Margaret. Just like this company. The silence was deafening. Her champagne glass slipped from her fingers and shattered on the floor. What did you say? She whispered. Davidson Industries. I own it. Or rather, my family has owned it for the past 30 years, since your father lost control of it. We let the Davidson name remain for appearances. Thomas stared at me stunned. Elena. I gave him a small smile. I'm sorry I couldn't tell you sooner, darling. I needed to see who you really were, apart from your family. Margaret shot up from her chair so fast it toppled over. You're lying. This is ridiculous. I'm calling security. I shook my head. Your security team works for me, Margaret. They have for years. Just like your executives, your board, and every major shareholder you think supports you. The color drained from her face. For years, you had treated me like a gold digger, acting superior, flaunting the Davidson wealth. And all along, it had been mine. This isn't possible, she whispered. We're the Davidsons. This is our company. I stood up, adjusting my jacket. No, Margaret. You are a former employee who has been stealing from my company. And tomorrow morning, the board will receive a full report on just how much you've taken. Chaos erupted. Margaret lunged for the documents. Thomas tried to calm her. Other family members gasped or began arguing among themselves. I picked up my purse, ready to leave. This was just the beginning. The Davidsons were about to learn that their world of wealth and power was built on nothing but paper. And that paper belonged to me. Thomas snapped back to reality. Margaret's words had stunned the entire room. Even by her usual standards, this was cruel. Thomas stood up, his face red with anger. That's enough. But Margaret, emboldened by champagne, smirked. Oh, sit down, Thomas. We all see it. This little nobody comes out of nowhere, sinks her claws into you, and now she's just waiting to cash in on the Davidson fortune. I remained calm, thinking about the company's financial reports on my desk. Margaret loved to brag about the Davidson fortune, but in truth, it was mostly an illusion, held together by loans and shady accounting. Actually, Margaret, I said quietly, we need to talk about the company's finances. She laughed coldly. You? Talk finances with me? I'm on the board of Davidson Industries, dear. What could you possibly tell me? This was the moment I had been waiting for. I reached into my purse, pulled out a slim folder, and placed it on the table. For starters, I could tell you about the unauthorized loans you've taken against company assets. Or maybe we should discuss the offshore accounts where you've been hiding company money. Margaret's champagne glass froze halfway to her lips. What are you talking about? The Cayman Islands accounts, I said, meeting her gaze. The ones you thought nobody knew about. Or should we talk about the shell company you set up to buy your vacation homes with company funds? Her hand trembled as she slammed her glass down, spilling champagne onto the tablecloth. Thomas, are you going to let her speak to me this way? Thomas looked between us, confused. Elena, what's going on? I slid the documents across the table. These are the real financial statements of Davidson Industries, not the fake ones Margaret has been showing the board. Would you like to explain why there's a $50 million discrepancy? Margaret's face went pale. Where did you get these? These are confidential. They're my documents, Margaret. Just like this is my company. Silence fell over the room. Margaret's champagne glass slipped from her fingers, shattering on the floor. What did you say? She whispered. I own Davidson Industries, or rather, my family has owned it since your father lost control of it 30 years ago. We just let the Davidson name remain for tradition. Thomas stared at me stunned. Elena. I gave him a small, sad smile. I'm sorry I couldn't tell you sooner, darling. I needed to know who you really were, not the version you pretended to be for your family's sake. Margaret shot up from her seat, knocking over her chair. You're lying. This is our company. I straightened my jacket. No, Margaret. You are a former employee who has been stealing from my company, and tomorrow morning the board will receive all the evidence. The room erupted into chaos. Margaret lunged for the documents. Thomas tried to calm her, and the rest of the family either sat in shock or began accusing each other. I picked up my purse, ready for the final blow. Oh, and Margaret, I said as I reached the door, you might want to hold off on redecorating the mansion. You won't be living there much longer. The next morning, I arrived at Davidson Industries headquarters early. The security team nodded respectfully. They had always known who truly signed their paychecks. By 8 o'clock a.m., I took my private elevator to the top floor, the one Margaret thought was reserved for Davidson family members only. At 8:47, Margaret stormed in, her designer outfit slightly wrinkled, last night's mascara smudged under her eyes. "Get out of my office," she snapped. I glanced around the luxurious space I had redecorated last month. "Your office? I don't see your name on the deed. In fact, I don't see Davidson on any company deeds anymore." She slammed her hands on my desk. "This is our company, our legacy." I opened my laptop. "Actually, it hasn't been your company since your father lost it 30 years ago. Would you like to see the original transfer documents? Or should we discuss the $12 million you've embezzled over the last 5 years? Her face turned pale. "You can't prove anything." "Wrong again." I turned my screen toward her, showing a spreadsheet filled with her illegal transactions. Unauthorized loans, fake vendor payments, offshore transfers. "Did you really think no one would notice you billing your spa treatments under building maintenance?" My phone buzzed. A message from Thomas. "We need to talk." "The board meeting starts in an hour," I told Margaret. "I suggest you use that time to consider your options carefully." She straightened, trying to regain her composure. "Options? Option 1. Resign quietly, repay what you've stolen, and leave with your reputation somewhat intact. Option 2. Face criminal charges for embezzlement. Your choice." She scoffed. "You wouldn't dare. I'm Thomas's mother. And I'm the woman you spent 3 years calling a gold digger." I met her eyes. Karma is funny that way. At the board meeting, I laid out the evidence. One by one, the directors reviewed the documents, their faces growing grimmer with each page. Margaret sat frozen, unable to deny what was right in front of them. "Mrs. Davidson," the lead director said, "these allegations are extremely serious. Do you have a response?" Before she could speak, the conference room door opened. Thomas walked in, carrying a folder of his own. Thomas took a deep breath, looking exhausted but determined. "I have something to add," he said, placing a folder on the table. Margaret's eyes lit up. "Thomas, tell them this is nonsense. Tell them what she's doing to our family." Instead of siding with her, Thomas opened the folder. "These are more records of stolen money. I found them in my mother's office last night." Margaret gasped. "Thomas, how could you?" He turned to her, his expression firm. "How could I? How could you, Mother? My whole life, I believed in the Davidson family's success and hard work. But it was all a lie, wasn't it? There is no Davidson fortune, just money you stole from Elena's company. Our company." Margaret's face twisted in anger. "She tricked you. She set us up." I stayed quiet, letting Thomas handle this. He had proven himself to be more honorable than I ever expected. "No, Mother," Thomas said. "Elena didn't trick anyone. She worked hard, earned my respect, and won my love. Meanwhile, you were busy spending money that didn't belong to you. If anyone should be ashamed, it's us, the Davidsons, who have been living off stolen wealth." The board voted to remove Margaret from her position and take legal action to recover the stolen funds. As security led her out, she turned back and hissed, "I'll tell everyone the truth. I'll expose you." I met her gaze, calm and unshaken. "Go ahead. Tell the world how the gold digger you mocked actually owns your company. I'm sure the press will love that story." After the meeting, Thomas and I finally talked in what was now my office. "Why didn't you tell me?" he asked quietly. "Would you have believed me over your mother?" He hesitated. 3 years ago, probably not, but you could have told me after we got married. I needed to know who you really were, Thomas, not just the Davidson heir, not just your mother's son. And today you proved you're exactly the man I hoped you'd be." "For turning in my own mother?" he asked. "For choosing integrity over blind loyalty," I said. "For doing the right thing, even when it hurt." 6 months later, the Davidson mansion was sold. Margaret moved in with her sister in Phoenix. Her social media had gone quiet. No grand posts about her retirement. The press had a field day, but not in the way she hoped. "Unknown here exposes family fraud. Davidson Empire's true owner reveals years of deception." The gold digger story she tried to spin fell apart when reporters uncovered my family's quiet success. Thomas and I moved into a penthouse near the company headquarters. He kept his job in middle management, determined to earn his own way. "I'm not my mother," he told me. "I don't want to pretend to be something I'm not." Last week, I received a letter from Margaret, forwarded by her lawyer. You ruined our family name. I hope you're happy with your revenge. I filed it away with the original documents proving the Davidsons had lost their company decades ago. It had never been about revenge. It was about truth. Last night, Thomas and I hosted our first dinner party in our new home. As we raised our glasses, he smiled at me. To my wife, he said, "Who taught me that true wealth isn't about what you own, but about who you are." The crystal glasses clinked. This time there were no lies, no fake legacies, just real success. My phone buzzed with a news alert. Davidson Industries stock had hit an all-time high under my leadership. In Phoenix, Margaret probably saw the same alert. Another reminder that the fortune she bragged about had never really been hers. Sometimes the best revenge isn't exposing the truth. It's letting those who underestimated you realize they never really knew you at all. And as for the Davidson family fortune, the real gold digger had never been the woman serving dinner in her own home. It had been the one stealing from it all along.